Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Portland Art Museum. My name is Julia Dolan. I'm the Minor White Curator of Photography.
And I'm Sarah Krajewski, the Eichholz Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. And together, we are the co-curators of the exhibition, Hank Willis Thomas, All Things Being Equal.
We're absolutely thrilled that you're all here for tonight's Arnold and Augusta Newman Distinguished Lecture in Photography with Kimberly Drew. And before we introduce Kimberly, we would like to say an incredible thank you to all of you, and in particular our staff here at the Portland Art Museum for making this very, very important exhibition such a success. This is its final weekend before it leaves us to go on to Bentonville, Arkansas, and then Cincinnati, Ohio. And so please spend time with it tonight after the lecture. Come back this weekend before we send it on its way. But thank you to all of you.
We would love to have a blockbuster end to the show, so definitely come back, bring friends if you can, and help us send this off with a bang. So thank you all so much. It's been so gratifying to have so many of you come many, many times to see the show, so thank you.
To begin, we would like to state that the Portland Art Museum recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of this region on whose ancestral lands this museum now stands. These include the Willamette, Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Molalla, Multnomah, and Watlala Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and many other Native communities who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence.
And also tonight we have an accessibility announcement. There are T-coil, headset, and earbud-compatible assistive listening devices available near the stage. Please let staff know if you would like to utilize one. They're on either side of the stage. Tonight we are using an automated captioning program to provide real-time captioning. These captions can be viewed on stage or by opening the URL pam.to/captions on your mobile web browser. That's pam.to/captions. And do please let us know if you have questions about that as well. We want to thank and acknowledge our deaf interpreter, Ty Burcham, and our American Sign Language interpreters, L'Oreal Aviles and Ashley Paul. For those new to experiencing events that use deaf interpreters, we want to give a quick explanation. Deaf interpreters are deaf themselves and typically use American Sign Language as their primary language. Because of their language fluency and cultural experience, they are able to provide better interpretation. Ty will be on stage interpreting to the audience. L'Oreal and Ashley will be in the front row interpreting the presentation into American Sign Language for Ty to base their interpretation on. Now, for all of these processes to work effectively, particularly during the question and answer period, we ask that one person speak at a time and that the microphone be used every time. So please do wait during the question section for the microphone to come to you before you begin. And lastly, if you have any access needs that aren't being met, please let staff know or come meet our head of accessibility, Becky Emmert, who will be by the front of the stage. Becky's raising her hand right now.
We are incredibly grateful to the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation for making this series of annual photography-focused lectures possible at the Portland Art Museum. Since 2013, the foundation, established in 2007 and named in honor of American photographer Arnold Newman and his wife Augusta, has supported important talks here that are free and open to all, featuring artists and scholars including Carrie Mae Weems, Jun Lee, Fuzzle Sheikh, Emmett Gowan, Richard Moss, and Dawood Bey. We would like to extend a sincere thank you to David Newman, Arnold and Augusta's son, and David's wife, Deirdre Steinberg, who live here with us in Portland but could not join us this evening.
And now, please join us in welcoming Ella Ray, the museum's Community Partnerships Coordinator, who will introduce Kimberly Drew. Since January of 2019, Ella has worked with us on the Hank Willis Thomas All Things Being Equal exhibition, focusing on in-depth collaborations with community groups including 96.7, The Numbers, Don't Shoot PDX, King School Museum of Contemporary Art, the Oregon Justice Resource Center, Portland in Color, and We Black at Wyden and Kennedy. So thank you all for being here. That's enough from Julia and I, and we will hand it over to Ella.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name's Ella Ray, and like they said, I'm the Community Partnerships Coordinator. I just want to extend gratitude for sharing your Thursday evening with us and closing this exhibition in this way. With this lecture by Kimberly Drew. Kimberly Drew is an author, a curator, an activist, and a founder of the iconic Tumblr account, Black Contemporary Art. Previously, Drew was the social media manager at the Met. Her work in and about social media has carried over into collaborations with brands like Prada and Instagram. Drew recently released her book, What I Know About Art, through Penguin Teen, and her forthcoming book, Black Futures, co-authored by Jenna Wortham, will be released in 2020. After her lecture, like they said, there will be a brief Q&A period, so have your questions ready and please use the microphone. Please help me give a warm welcome to Kimberly Drew.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. That's my limited ASL. It is such a privilege to be here in Portland, and I'm almost emotional being invited in this way to give a talk in this way. In my, aside from all the stuff I'll talk about, in the last few years, I've been really passionate about how to do the work that I do better. And how to do the work that I do in a more accessible way. And I just want to extend extreme gratitude to everyone here at this museum that has made every one of my requests possible. And I'm sure that these are things that you guys do regularly, but I'm just very thankful for that, because it doesn't always happen. Now I'm teary-eyed. But it's hard out here, You're like, I just want stuff, and people are like, oh, stuff is hard. It's like, but more people can come, and they're like, oh. And very specifically, I just want to shout out Jaleesa, Julia, Stephanie, Ella, and Becky, because y'all made it happen. We had to change the date, blah, blah, blah. We love flexibility in 2020. So a thing that I've started doing recently, because the idea of a lecture scares me. I'm an art historian. I studied and did, all the checks and balances of what it means to be a curator. But in many ways, I find myself trying to challenge the ways in which those titles can be elitist. And so instead of a lecture, tonight is more of a meditation. That's a word I've been trying out, because I really think that I left my ruminations on this topic of photography and what it means with more questions than answers. And at the end of my presentation, you'll see me spiral as I try to clamor together a thesis. And so I call it a meditation because I think lectures maybe have destination points, and I don't really have one. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes about my career, about some images that I really love, and at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions, clarify anything for anyone. So I'm going to start my lecture meditation, as I start all lectures and meditations, with this quote by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is one of the first scholars of African American history. He says, "If a race has no history, It has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. I found this quote when I was an intern at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 2010. I return to this quote often because I like how extra the language is. I like that he utilizes the word exterminated because I think that that's the urgency that we should all bring to the work that we're doing when it comes to thinking about representation and work of equity. Every step that we take is a step against erasure and extermination, and it should be that extreme. Oh, and then I also want to start with a disclaimer. In this distinguished lecture, which is just like, God, it's so intense. I often interchange images and photographs. I do that somewhat intentionally and not without forethought about how the history of photography, especially within the last half century, has been a really difficult one. People recognizing photographs as artwork is not something that like really is as common as it should be. And so I say images and photographs interchangeably, thoughtfully, and I encourage anyone in the audience who's curious about the difference between the two to research and investigate. But I kind of mix them in together in a way that I think might make some art historians angry. And so I want to half apologize for that. It's my talk, my rules. So I want to start, of course, with Hank's work. This work, Basketball and Chain, is one of my favorite of Hank's works. I think it really speaks to the power of his photographic process as an artist. You see so many images, you see so many sub-images within this image that communicate themes of Blackness, maleness perhaps, consumer culture, the history of slavery, the impact of white supremacy, all layered onto one. I also wanted to start tonight's meditation with a quote from this incredible resource that I found on the website. Shout out to the educators who put this sources and reference guide together. It's very good. And there's tons of quotes and links for anyone who's visited the exhibition or plans to visit the exhibition again. It's a really incredible wayfinding device for the very complicated themes that you'll see in the show. And oftentimes people just don't click on those links, so I encourage you to take the time to do that after this talk. In the catalog for the exhibition, Hank is in conversation with Dr. Kelly Jones. And in the conversation, Hank says, "In photography programs, they teach you ways of seeing, because photography is all about perspectives and timing. It's not just about making a good image, but actually thinking about how the image will function in the world, the connections that viewers might have to it, how you might get closer to our subjects and further explore. Depending on where you stand, it affects what you see, and everyone is negotiating different perspectives." And I thought that that was such a brilliant way to kind of start the ways in which we might tonight have a dialogue about images and photography, because it really is about how you're seeing, how you're interacting, what each of us as individuals takes away from the images that we're encountering. When I was thinking about coming here, and especially the last 2 weeks, like I think we can all agree, anyone who's using social media, it's been a very difficult 2 weeks. You open up Instagram and oftentimes you're immediately confronted with pictures of so many of the evils in the world just kind of coming right at you. And I wanted to, in my original thought about this talk, be really pessimistic and talk about how images are bad and hurtful and how images have hurt me recently. But instead of doing that, I tried to challenge myself, especially in considering this quote from Hank, to talk more about images that have inspired me, images that have really taken me on a journey through my career and through my life, and perhaps to extend a note of gratitude to some of those images. And so I want to start with an image that probably is like the most important image in my career trajectory in life and all these things. It's this one. So random, right? You guys weren't expecting that. So I discovered this image while I was a wee baby at the Studio Museum in Harlem. For the sake of sounding professional, I want to say that I found it on a break. I may not have found it while breaking. But I found this image while I was an undergraduate. I'd probably taken one art history course before I found myself as an intern at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Shout out to the Studio Museum and other museums who give people a shot, even though they don't have sterling GPAs and track records of studying art history. And while I was interning there, I found this image. In the top corner, I recognized that guy, the white guy. I was like, oh, that's Andy Warhol, one of the 15 artists at the time that I knew. But I didn't know who he was punching. I was like, oh, who could this person be? Using my critical thinking skills, started to research Jean-Michel Basquiat for the first time. And I was pissed. I was immediately angry because I thought to myself, one, this is 1985, as you see in the bottom. It's kind of small, but you see the year that this, I think it's a show poster for the Shafrazi Gallery, was circulated. I was like, wow, this Black artist who has made these incredible paintings, who has who had made these incredible paintings and had reached these incredible levels of acclaim, I've never heard of. I started to think of him in that immediate moment as the Black Warhol because I didn't know any better. And I was so obsessed with the thought of how many more Black versions of artists that I love exist out there. How many more artists have been shielded from me or have I not found yet? And how can I make sure that I'm not missing out on them? Many years later, of course, I can say there is no such thing as a Black Warhol. There is no such thing as a Black version of this or Black version of that. Each of the artists that I will, of course, talk about in my presentation are singular artists in their own rights. But I also try to extend compassion to the younger version of myself who was like, it's got to be the Black this or that. And so when I saw this image, I, like I said, began researching. And it sent me on this really interesting quest. It directed me towards artists like Mickalene Thomas. It directed me towards artists like Lorna Simpson. And of course, directed me towards artists like Hank Willis Thomas. And this one is actually my favorite one. I know you're not supposed to pick favorites. But I've always loved this image because I think it really is just, one, beautiful. And I just want to say, like, as an art nerd, sometimes things can just be beautiful. They don't have to be particularly poignant. You can just like them or dislike them. But for me, I really like this image because, one, it speaks so much to Black Southern culture. It speaks, of course, to the Black Power movement. It speaks to notes of Black joy. It speaks so much to self-identification, self-determination, so many of the things that, at the time that I found this image, I really needed to see. When I was finishing with my internship at the Studio Museum in Harlem, I felt, one, sad, but I also felt really hopeful because I'd finally found an institution or finally found a space that helped me to better understand who I am in the world. So the Studio Museum, for anyone who doesn't know, is a museum that's based in Harlem that's interested in putting forth work by and about Black culture. And it was in those 10 weeks that I had my aha moment on who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be. When I got back to Smith College, which is where I was studying art history, I fully threw myself into art historical studies. I was taking 3 and 4 classes a semester, trying to catch up to my peers to ensure that I would finish with an art history major. And the more art history classes that I started taking, the less kinds of images I was seeing of the images that got me invested in the first place. I was taking Baroque architecture and learning about the Survey of Asian Art and all these other wonderful things from the past, and really learning how to think critically and put my thinking cap on and visual thinking strategies. And I was pushed to many academic limits that I didn't even know I was seeking. But more than that, I also wasn't seeing myself reflected back. And so in February of 2011, I reached out to my friend Marcellus, who was an intern with me at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and posted this to his Facebook page, asking him to join me in building out a Tumblr page that was interested in promoting the work of Black contemporary artists. When I finished my internship at the Studio Museum in Harlem, I should also note that I probably knew the name of around 10 Black artists, tops, 10 to 15, the ones that I'd encountered while interning in the director's office. And I knew that I wanted to continue to learn more. And also I was a millennial, or I am a millennial, I should say. I was 20 years old, and I was like, I need more. I'm really angry about it. It has to happen right now. And while I was back on Smith's campus, I was doing a lot of research to try to find some sort of resource to continue to learn, because I knew that I wasn't seeing it in my art history lectures. And I went and Googled, and I searched Wikipedia, and high and low across the internet. I look back now and I'm like, sis, why didn't you go to the library? But I was 20 and angry. And so instead I went to the internet, and when I didn't find anything or didn't find the exact thing that I was looking for, in a very kind of Toni Morrison way, decided to make the thing that I wanted to see myself. And I reached out to Marcellus because I knew that I couldn't do it alone. And I also decided to use Tumblr specifically because I didn't know anything. Like, the only thing I knew was that I didn't know. And sometimes that's enough. And I liked Tumblr and continue to root for Tumblr, even though it's changed so much, because it is a site that's perhaps the most dialogical. I always have seen it as a platform where you don't have to go in as expert. It's not like Blogger or some more stationary platform where you publish onto the web from this space of knowing. It's a space where you show up and hashtag your way into discovery and collaboration with others. And so I reached out to Marcellus to join me on this journey. He said no, which whatever. But in this moment of early 20s angst, decided to start the blog anyway. And so this is kind of like my stylized version of the blog as it exists right now. So the blog is called Black Contemporary Art, and it was launched March 2011 in the interest of kind of making a digital version or a digital extension of a lot of what the Studio Museum's mission is, but then also with a personal twist, really interested in recording the work of Black artists that I was continuing to learn over time. And then also just to privilege the 10, 15 artists that I'd already learned. As I look back on who I was at that time, I think what was most important was paying tribute to the knowledge that had already been instilled in me, because it was that knowledge that inspired me to do something with it. The blog, as it has always existed, it's blackcontemporaryart.tumblr.com. For anyone who hasn't checked it out. When I first made it, as I mentioned, I wasn't going into libraries, right? I was angsty, I was really, really curious and really excited about learning more. And one of the things that at that time I knew to be true, which is so untrue, was that there was perhaps no art historical language for Black artists. That was kind of how I reasoned why there was no Black art history course at my college. That was kind of why I'd reasoned that I'd never heard of Basquiat. That was kind of why I'd reasoned that I hadn't learned about Dina Lawson or Renee Green. And so the blog as it exists now, it just has the artwork itself, the name of the artist, the name of the work, and the year it was created. Because I didn't want to try to define what the work should be to anyone. I also, in a more real way, was too intimidated to write anything about art. But I knew that this resource needed to exist, if only for myself. And I was also joined, so it's really tiny up here, but the blog has always been co-edited by a group of people. And I say that to say never, never, ever be afraid to call people in when you have a big idea. I'm an only child and a Leo, and asking for help is just not my way. But it is the projects that I've asked for help that still exist and have had any success. And so This blog has existed and really was built as an educational tool. And as it grew and grew, one, I was shocked because I didn't think that it wasn't designed to grow. It wasn't designed to reach what has now like 200,000 followers. It was designed really as a primary resource tool for people to be inspired by Black artists. In the summer of 2012, I graduated from school and moved to New York City to start working at an art organization called Creative Time, which is a public art organization with a social justice bent that's interested in presenting art in the public realm. And it was such an important first gig for me because as a fellow and as a social media fellow, I was able to trick a ton of people into thinking that a kid with a Tumblr deserved a job. But also it challenged me to think about how to utilize social media to really like decidedly reach new audiences. It challenged me to think about how I could use social media to draw people to destinations to view art. Because up until that point, a lot of the work that I was doing was making the destination digital. I really enjoyed the idea that you could open up your phone and have a primary encounter with a work of art, and maybe that might draw you to a gallery, but maybe you don't need to go to the gallery, or maybe you might find yourself at a gallery and pleasantly surprised by an artwork that you may have discovered online already. But it was in working at Creative Time and in working at an organization that thought a lot about social justice that I was inspired to take what was this digital platform and take it to the streets. That's not what I wanted to say, but it's kind of what I did. And so I started doing public programming with the little resources that I had. I reached out to the Guggenheim Museum when they had their Carrie Mae Weems exhibition, which traveled there from, I think, the Veralis Center in Virginia, and invited people to come and view the artwork together. Because alongside thinking about a lack of representation of Black artists in an art historical canon or in pop culture, I also am, at that time especially, and even now, was acutely aware of how few Black and brown people were readily invited into museum spaces, and how that lack of invitation perhaps was what was keeping people away. Like I said, I'm a Leo, and so I was like, I want to bring people, and so I showed up and invited people, gave them free tickets to the museum for an afternoon of co-viewing. And then I also curated like the one exhibition that I've ever curated and probably will ever curate. Shout out to the curators in the room. Like, I lost hair, I lost sleep. I was very inspired by the happenings of like the 60s and 70s and put together this performance with two dear friends, Christopher Udemezue, who now does a project called Raga, exploring queerness in Jamaica and within kind of Caribbean diasporic communities, and then Juliana Huxtable, who's an incredible multimedia artist. We packed into this tiny gallery in Chinatown to put on a show for people. Because as I knew then and as I know now, I think it really is about not only presenting information, but also really providing invitation. And then I did a party, which is also fun. The blog, when it turned 5 in 2016, I worked with friends who owned a gallery in Bushwick and invited people to just celebrate, to create space for joy and exaltation around the work. The blog is going to be 10 next year, which is wild. My baby's growing up. And so I've been thinking about other ways to convene people. But one of the things that I think is really important in the note on the party was that when I started the blog, I was able to start it privately. I was able to start it actually like while I was doing my work study job. I was in an office by myself. I didn't have the pressures of success or failure looming over me. I wasn't, like I said, building something that was meant to grow or to reach broad audiences or to get me here or anywhere. And it allowed me a freedom to publish, and it allowed me a freedom to explore and to get things wrong. And by the time that the 5th anniversary had come, I'd found myself in the art world. I'd found myself starting to feel the pressures of what it meant to be a person of color in the arts, how many immediate no's there are, silent or self-enforced or self-imposed. And when I was thinking about the 5th anniversary, all I could think about was grounding it in some sort of academic process. I thought I had to do a symposium or, bring in scholars to anchor it, or do like a Wikipedia edit-a-thon or something that would like make it seem smart. And through a lot of counsel from friends was like, I'm just gonna have a party. Because sometimes that's enough. And sometimes, it is about coming as you are. It is about providing space for freedom around really big ideas. And so anyway, just thought. But I'm really proud of myself when I look back on that moment and saying like, no, I'm not gonna do it the traditional way. At around the time that I started working on Black contemporary art, and around the time that I went to do my fellowship at Creative Time, I also started to think about what it meant to publish as an individual. Black contemporary art, for better or worse, was a group project, and because it was a group project, it almost made it anonymous, which in many ways I still battle on whether being anonymous or like saying this is my thing is the right thing to do. But as I began my life in the workforce, and as I moved to New York with like $0 and 0 cents, and was bouncing around to openings to get food and to see art, I felt really inspired to journal using social media, to share my journey with other people, to share the impossibility of a young Black queer person from a suburb in New Jersey arriving in this art world and being welcomed with open arms because of this strange blog that they'd created. On my Instagram, I've tried my hardest to make sure that I'm showing what it means to interact with art. Because I think oftentimes people have these predetermined ideas of who and how you are in museums. Recently, I took a group of friends to the MoMA to visit the new MoMA. And as I was walking around in the galleries with them, we were zooming through, there's, Kathy Opie's work and Lyle Ashton Harris's work and all these illustrious artists on the wall. And I knew who they were, but my friends didn't know who they were. And so I was perhaps moving at a different pace. And one of my friends kind of grabbed me by the arm and stopped me and asked, "What do you do in museums?" And it was this really profound moment because I genuinely think that for some reason we're all lied to that like you're supposed to look at a work of art, tilt your head to the side, rub your chin, lean in. When in actuality, people look at things for like less than 10 seconds. And so I've been really on this kind of like personal journey to try to demystify that. Controversial topic, using the art selfie or the museum selfie, and trying to really unpack what it means when we image ourselves in museums. Because I think in one way, of course, people want you to respect the art. But in another way, it's also an important medium for letting people know what's up, letting people know when and where exhibitions are. Maybe things are free. Maybe this is how many steps there are to access the building. There's so many ways in which social media affords us an opportunity to invite people into a dialogue that perhaps they've never been invited to. And so I also, also wanted to note in terms of Instagram strategy, I was just like ranting about how much I hate Instagram strategy and how I think a lot of it is myths, like hashtags and timings and all that stuff. But in 2015, the artist E. Jane, they created this really beautiful filter that was inspired by the extrajudicial murder of Sandra Bland. And the project is called Alive, and then in parentheses, it's Not Yet Dead. And what you could do was download the filter to like photo booth, like in the Mac, and it's like doot, doot, doot. And you could take images of yourself. And the call from the artist was for especially Black people to participate in this project. And it's something that I think of often because many times, especially in my personal career as a person who's kind of for the last decade managed social media channels, personal or professional. I spend more time than most people on the internet, which means that unfortunately within this political climate, I'm confronted with images of Black pain more than some others, of images of Black death more than others, or in conversation with others. And I really appreciated this project as an opportunity and a call to show what it means to be Black and alive. And that has remained a stream and like impetus for so much of my social media presence, where it's not just about the art. It's not just about, you know, rah, rah, this is my blah, blah, blah. It's also just like, I'm still here. And there's so much possibility in that. And so this is kind of like what maybe my Instagram looks like. And I try within the platform, whenever possible, to, of course, share art, to share images of friends in the field. Because oftentimes, too, I think when I was having my, like, Basquiat moment, I also couldn't name any people of color in the arts, probably besides Thelma Golden, who was my boss at the time. And now I feel really fortunate to be in community with so many incredible scholars who I would have loved to have linked to on the blog when I didn't think there was any art historical language about Black artists. And so in front of that Warhol piece is my friend Jessica Bell Brown, who's a curator now at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And so it's equal parts that, nerdy art stuff, and then equal parts memes. And equal parts really thoughty selfies, and trying to show that, you know, this is all the things that make me me, and alive. And, oh, yes. So I also wanted to talk about some photography projects that I love, just to make this a real photography lecture. On the note of social media, I think oftentimes, like I was saying, there can be these like endless weeks and moments where we're inundated with images of pain, images of suffering. But I wanted to just give a special shout out to two photography projects that I've remained really particularly inspired by. The first is a project called Veteranas Enrucas, which was founded by Guadalupe Rosales, who basically is using social media and Instagram specifically to call to Latinx people to submit their own photos of themselves. And so on the page, and now in a publication that's gorgeous, you'll see these images from Southern California from like the 1980s, I think, up into the present day, so that people can either publish them or share them, draw connections with them, spend an afternoon in the comment section. It's really beautiful. And then in that same kind of vein of publication, there's another project that's based in the UK called Black in the Day that does a similar thing, that's interested in documenting the lives of Black people living in the UK. I call to these two projects because I think oftentimes, and this is where like the weird photography image thing happens, I think oftentimes within especially kind of the ways in which art history and the ways in which history and record keeping can be so exclusionary to people across the spectrum of neurotypicalness, neurodivergence, or people who are representative of marginalized communities, oftentimes we don't think to record ourselves. And what I think is so important right now in the social media moment is that we have incredible opportunity, incredible chances to celebrate the mundane, to celebrate the everyday, to ensure that we're not exterminated. And I really, really, really love these projects because I think that they're perfect examples of that kind of work. It's not just about the numbers. It's not just about making a grandstand and impact. Sometimes it's just about recording and building community for those who might be seeking it. And so this quote is by my favorite person, one of my favorite people, Sarah Lewis, who guest edited a really beautiful issue of Aperture magazine, and she called the issue Vision and Justice, and is now doing work to make Vision and Justice into so many other things. She's had a convening. There's hopefully so much more that will percolate from that project. But this quote in particular has stuck with me, kind of haunted me in this image moment, if you will. Sarah writes, being an engaged citizen requires grappling with pictures and knowing their historical context with, at times, near art historical precision. And so I really love this quote, which I have paraphrased to death and taken so many things, because that's kind of like what we all do with quotes that we love. But I feel like this quote in particular is such a call to action for each of us to think about what images we're intaking, what impact they have on us, what demands they have on our brains and the ways in which we communicate and understand the world, and then also what ways in which we enact that on our own. How can we think critically about the images that we're sharing on social media or in other spaces? How can we think critically as maybe art practitioners or media makers and what we're putting out into the world and what context we're building? This is where my spiral begins, because I think it really is a matter of thinking critically about how these things are impacting all of us. And so I return back to this image, which is the beginning of my personal spiral, which has been a pretty successful one, I think, so far. I want to challenge all of you to think about your images, how you're sharing them, how they impact you, the ones that keep you up at night, the ones that help you to start a weird blog or Instagram page or conversation with a person on the street. This image is mine. And then I'm going to show you some other images that recently have really inspired me. But I challenge all of you to think about the images that hold you, whether those images are in Hank's exhibition or beyond, because they really can have such a profound impact on a life. So these are my 4 favorite images right now, which is not like a formal lecture thing, but I just wanted to share them because they make me happy. This one, which I love. Tyler Mitchell's cover story on Beyonce. And then this picture by the photographer Joshua Woods of the model Erin Phillip and friends. This image by LaToya Ruby Frazier from the series Flint is Family. And then this last one, which is my friend Mickey on the cover of Pause magazine. Thank you. So I think we'll open now for any questions about anything you all would like to talk about. We can bring mics to people, right? We can pass them around. So if you'd like to ask a question, you just raise your hand if that is available to you.
Hello, when I researched you on the internet, I found some very interesting items about you talking with Janelle Monáe, 2 items on YouTube talking about accessibility, but especially inclusiveness in museums. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So I was really fortunate last year to be invited by the musical artist Janelle Monáe to have a conversation about, I think we were talking about the future. And Janelle is a person who I've been a fan of since I was probably like 13 years old or something. And we sat and had a dialogue about the work that each of us were doing respectively. And I got a chance to talk about art and my personal inspirations around trying to make these spaces more inclusive. In my practice, aside from, I didn't talk at all about the work that I did at the Met. If you have any questions about the work I did at the Met, I'm happy to talk about it. I was their social media manager for 3 years. But in my dialogue with Janelle, one of the things that I really wanted to nail home, that this broad audience, it was hosted by Harper's Bazaar. One of the things that I wanted to drive home for people to think about was that we all have a role in making museums more accessible, which is a direct call, of course, to peers who are working in museums, people who are educators, curators, registrars. Everyone has an opportunity to say hello to a guest, to direct someone to a restroom or to a gallery. And then also as individuals, we all have the capability to take a family member to a museum. Like you guys all found yourselves here. Now you're responsible for bringing other people. That's your duty now. And so that was what I was trying to speak to Janelle about and to that broader audience about, because I think oftentimes it's very easy to say, museums are very exclusionary. Museums are institutions of white supremacy. See, So easy to say. But I also think it's equally important to think about how we're going to work to deconstruct that, how we can each take it on in ourselves within our facilities to do something about it, because I like action. Yeah. Does that answer it? Anybody else?
We have a question down here.
Yeah.
Hello. I love your Instagram feed, and I really appreciate how you kind of live your life unapologetically in a very public space. And I wonder if you've had to deal with any negativity in that kind of presence online.
Yeah. I've been relatively unscathed, if you can believe it. My worst critics are my family. They're like, it's great, you're so successful, we love that. Also, why do you curse so much? Which I think I got through the lecture without cursing. I saw that there were children in the audience, and like, this is a big step for me. I'm really profane. I gave this really beautiful, or I think beautiful, lecture in May of last year and revealed my salary at this like huge museum conference. And my dad was there, and he was so mortified because I dropped like 15 F-bombs, but I was so nervous. But at any rate, for the most part, I've been relatively unscathed, but I will say that, and also say that many of my friends have not. And so I do my best to try to like hop into comment sections and say nice things about friends and make sure that they're tagged and that they're getting positive energy. But yeah, for the most part, I've been trying to, I think I've been able to be relatively true to who I am and true to form without a ton of criticism, which isn't like the funnest answer, but also maybe it is the funnest answer that a Black queer person doesn't get torn down on the internet.
Got another one back here.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, just want to say thank you so much for being here. This was really insightful and eye-opening, and I appreciate all the knowledge that you've given to everyone here tonight. My question to you is, have you ever thought about, so with digital archiving, as we pass images through the internet, there's a level of like degradation that comes with that, because depending on the type of file, it degrades over time. I don't know if that's something you've thought about, that on top of like how algorithms in and of themselves actually end up being inaccessible. So we have like algorithms that like can actually like be racist, how we shadow ban specifically Black and brown activists on social media, especially when they bring up issues pertaining to like their histories as well. So I was wondering, like, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like, what does it mean to archive contemporary work today?
Yeah, two really excellent questions. First, I think a lot about image degradation, but from a very soft place, because I don't really understand it. Not gonna lie. And also just in general too, so just to answer two questions at once, if there's any criticism that I think I've really, really gotten, it's that people are like, why are you showing so much art online? People need to go see it. And I'm like, ugh, but everybody can't go see it. Or maybe people need a vocabulary of what they're going to go see. And so I think about it more in that, where it's like, how can I make sure that the images that I'm sharing are at the highest quality, so that people can, so that maybe screen readers can read the image, or that people are seeing the best, most high quality version of this thing that hopefully they'll be able to see in person, but maybe they won't, and maybe that's okay. And then on the note of archiving, it's something that I feel really stressed out about right now, as Tumblr is changing so much, because the blog as it exists right now isn't archived. It's just, that's it. And if like Tumblr closed tomorrow, that's it. And I know I need to just like hire an intern to do it, but also I'm a procrastinator. And so it's something that I think often about, but not something that I necessarily have tools for. And then on the note of shadow banning, so annoying, right? Like, so annoying. It's something that I don't exactly know how to tackle. I would lie to you to say that, like, here is my 10-point plan for how to fix it. I would encourage, though, I know that Salty, there's a platform called Salty, that's feminist magazine. They're doing a lot of work, especially around nudity on the platform and censorship and that, right? And they are very, like, action-oriented folks, and so I want to call to their work. And then personally, I've spoken a lot with people at Instagram internally about censorship and the ways in which especially trans bodies are invisibilized on that platform, it's wild. Because you can show a male nipple and not a female nipple. And it's like, why is an algorithm determining gender? So all that to say, I too am confused about all of these things. I too am angry about these things. But because of the work that I've done and the spaces that I found myself, I've been in a position to speak directly to some people there. And I'm trying my best to make sure that I'm standing firmly interested in speaking on behalf of my community and others. But those things keep me up at night and make me really uncomfortable and kind of make me want to quit sometimes, or the platform, not the work. But at the same time, I also know that like it's really important to be there and to purvey these images. So it's a constant battle. But it's definitely something that I've been thinking about really critically for a very long time. And it just seems like it's getting worse. And so I wonder, especially with the election coming up, blah, 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 it's a crapshoot. So it's definitely something I'm thinking about. Unfortunately, not a thing that I have any strong answers towards, though.
I have a question over here.
I just was hoping to hear more about your future book project.
Yeah. So I have 2 books that are coming out this year, which is a wild thing to say. So one of the books that I worked on last year is called This Is What I Know About Art. I was invited by Penguin's teen workshop along with a couple of really like way cooler activist people to write books specifically oriented at kind of an 11 to 13-year-old range. The suite of books that are coming out alongside mine are books by Alok Menon, who is an incredible image activist, poet, hero, personal hero of mine, and Adam Eli, who is a really, really beautiful thinker around issues of gender and sexuality and Judaism. And in my book, I wrote about art and activism, and specifically like a kind of a memoir style, even though I really hate memoir, like because I'm not even 30 yet. But I also realized that memoir is like a moment in time. And in the writing of my memoir, I was able to write about how some of the small actions that I've spoken about this evening have amounted to a career and amounted to some key changes and shifts within the field. And then also some of the reality behind the person I was pretending to be online. Like I've had this interesting reckoning recently where in the interest of being like, the arts are great, you should come here. And then the personal kind of like turmoil that I was feeling, the weight of knowing that I'm inviting people into institutions that maybe aren't ready for them yet. And so I was able to work through some of that in that book for babies. Also because like sometimes it's just, I don't know, I was never taught at 11 that I could be a curator, and that makes me angry too. And so I wanted to do that project. And then the other project that I've been working on for just over 3 years is a book called Black Futures, which aligns with kind of the earlier question about archiving and image breakdown and all those things. Jenna Wortham, who is behind the podcast Still Processing, and then also is an incredible writer at the New York Times Magazine, she DM'd me. And I was like, what? And she's like a real writer. And we went out for lunch, and over lunch had a really beautiful conversation about art, tech, culture through a Black cultural lens. And Jenna had the brilliant idea to make a zine, just to start to record some of what was going on, because we were both observing these incredible ways in which, especially within a Black cultural context, people were connecting in ways that were unprecedented. There were just more access than ever before and ways of connecting with each other. But also, because we don't own the platforms in which we're connecting, we stand at a risk for extermination or erasure. Because we don't own Facebook, because we don't own Twitter or whatever have you, blogs or whatever. And so Jenna wanted to make a zine, and because I'm a masochist, I was like, let's make a book. And so we've been working on this book called Black Futures that asks all nearly 300 of our contributors, what does it mean to be Black and alive right now? It's largely inspired by Toni Morrison's Black Book of the 1970s. And in the book, we have a mixture of recipes, interviews, essays, artworks, that it's kind of like a portrait of where we are right now. We tried to be as comprehensive as possible. It's a very queer book. It's like the gayest book I've ever read, and I'm so glad I wrote it. But really looking at Black culture right now, because we want to make sure that, here's hoping that in 20, 30 years, when people look back at our time, that this can be a resource for understanding what we were up to. And so that's the book project, which is due this fall.
I have another question over here in the back.
Hi.
Hello.
I grew up in Bushwick in the 60s and 70s, and I just cannot believe that it's like this art mecca now. Because, it was just a working class city with factories on all the corners and stuff that I understand are now like art buildings. So that's interesting. Yeah. Anyway, but the other thing about growing up in New York in the 60s was that there was money for us to do art, to learn art, to go listen to music, see plays, go to the art museums. Most of what we saw, of course, had to do with white artists and white subjects. I loved it. I still love it. It makes me so happy to know that there are people who are expanding the understanding of what serious art is, that includes women and people of color and the queer community, just expanding everyone's opportunity to be seen and seen in different ways. So I thank you very much for your work. I don't understand all the computer stuff that you're talking about.
Me neither.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, there. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I just moved to Bushwick, actually, so I might ask you some questions later.
Got a question down here, Kimberly.
Kimberly, I'd like to thank you so much for coming to Portland to talk to us about art and about Black art, about art of people of color. But I want to ask you about the word rage. You talked about rage in your 20s when you found out there was a world of Black art and artists. How did you, could you talk a little bit more about how did you make a constructive way to channel their rage instead of making it destructive?
That's a great question. I actually have these, you can't see them, but I have a ring that says Black Rage just to always remind myself to stay angry. People are always like, what's that ring say? And I'm like, rage, Black Rage. I'm like TSA, you have questions about it? It's an interesting thing that I've been thinking about because I was setting intentions for this new year, and I think by virtue of who and how I've been on this journey, I've learned how to be very small. I've gotten really good at it, at being really polite and really quiet, and then also in many ways I'm very bad at it. I got most opinionated in high school, which is wild because I didn't even say anything. But at any rate, I think for me, it's not so much about making rage productive, because I don't even know that the blog was a productive thing to do. I was studying art history, I was working my way through college, I was the head of 3 clubs because, this is no surprise, I'm overachiever type. But I was doing so many things that were not supposed to be spending 6 hours a day on Tumblr. But it was what I needed to do. So in many ways, it was kind of destructive. A lot of friends at the time were like, you're posting every 30 minutes? You need to be in class. And look at where I am now. But, which isn't say fail out of school, but I think all those things are kind of relative, right? But what remains most important is holding rage and just appreciating it as both a destructive and generative force. Because that's really the truth of my story and kind of what I want to really get back, the version of myself I want to get back to. Yeah. because I like when I was talking to my therapist, now I'm spiraling, but talking to my therapist, and my therapist is like, why is anger bad? Like, that's always the question that we arrive at again. Because I think the more time that I spent in institutional spaces, now I'm like freelance and doing my own thing and kind of can say what I want sometimes. But for so much of my career, you know, in the spectrum between when I started this blog really angry and now, I had to be good, you know? I had to be good also so that I could bring more people in, right? Like, there was a responsibility on me that I was first self-imposed and now is real, to make sure that I'm successful so that other people can see a path towards success, right? Like, this project can't fail. And so how angry can I be, right? And also how, you know, how is my non-anger connected to the truth of the matter is like the thing I'm constantly inspecting. Anyway, but yeah, I keep this ring on me every day just to remember that rage is important. There's a book also Brittany Cooper wrote called Eloquent Rage, and just like unpacking different ways of looking at rage. But yeah, I don't know. Not a non-answer, but I like rage. Try to hold more of it in 2020.
I have a question over here. Oh, one and then two.
Hi, my name's Steph. My pronouns are she, her. Going back to taking action and kind of becoming comfortable and being unapologetically yourself with taking up space. When you first started thinking about the art and the creative process, how did you overcome self-doubt from where your idea or project came up to leading to actually taking that action and having that end result?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me it was like the rage. Like, you guys are all in sync. But it was being angry, right? It didn't need to be successful. You know, like I'm lucky because it was. I'm thankful for the support that I've gotten and the ways in which it's empowered or inspired or whatever a group of people. But it really was from that anger and that I started doing the project. It wasn't in the interest of like this broader kind of plot or plan, so there was no room for doubt. You know, like it wasn't operating on a spectrum where there was success and failure. Like the failure would have been not doing it, right? And which is true of all projects. But in other projects, I'm nothing but doubt. I'm like doubt in a dress and heels at all times. But sometimes you just got to do it, right? Sometimes you just have to think about the trickle-down effect of the big things that scare you. And I think also that's why I often keep the Woodson quote with me, because it's like sometimes you have to do the scary thing because on the other side, the scarier thing is extermination. And yeah, I don't know, you have to kind of learn from doing. Yeah.
Okay, and I have another question here.
Thank you. Thanks, Kimberly. I've been reflecting a lot. This is a lot louder than I expected it to be. I've been reflecting a lot on how Instagram is really the only place where I see advertising, and connecting now and also then reflecting on the ways in which Hank utilizes and unpacks advertising in his work as well. And given your personal and professional experience with Instagram, I'm curious how you engage with, say, advertising and sponsored content within the platform itself.
Yeah. I post sponsored posts shamelessly with brands and organizations that I really love. I try to be as critical and thoughtful as possible in how I participate in that process. But it is kind of annoying, right? Like, sometimes you just like, I want to see pictures of cats and babies and like really good memes and like whatever. But it is a weird kind of complicated space when this presumably creative platform is also a space that's readily monetized. But then at the same time too, it's like, I think that there's this really strange thing that often happens where we don't think about artists as like small business owners, where it's like everyone wants to talk about like art for art's sake and like the virtue of creating. And it's like, people got bills. Like, let's talk about that, you know? Like, so I'm of two minds about it all the time, and how virtuous and pure certain spaces can or should be. and trying to just like constantly unpack and challenge those notions. But yeah, it is one of those weird ones though. But like, shout out to every artist in the room that's like doing the thing, because it really is. It just isn't spoken about enough as a business, and that's what it can be should you choose to take that path, and it doesn't have to be frowned upon.
One back here.
Hi. It sounds like so much of your work has been about exposing and like sharing images. I'm curious about whether, like, how protective are you of those images? It sounds like your experience on the internet has been relatively kind also, but is there anything that you've seen that you've been a little protective of, reticent to share, and what's your relationship to that, wanting to protect and maybe not want it to be as exposed?
Yeah. I recently started sending friends nudes. That's my my new relinquishing moment. But on a more serious note, yeah, it's something I think about a lot. There was this petition that went around by the artist Hannah Black that I shared on my Tumblr blog, and many other platforms shared. But Hannah wrote from a very truthful space about observations that Hannah was making, and there was such intense blowback. And I've always felt a responsibility for being a part of that, just because I showed this thing to other people. And so I always try to be accountable to that. In building Black contemporary art especially too, because I was finding images and posting them, and especially at the time that I was making it, didn't think about actually asking people for permission and consent. And so if someone ever messaged and said, like, this needs to come down, immediately would happen. Because oftentimes you have artists who are publishing things as work in progress. Or, there's so many ways in which, like, you can betray that, wherever someone might be in their process of making before sharing it with a broader audience. But those are the questions that I often have. I think a lot about, like, sharing my friends' kids on my Instagram because I have so many followers, and I'm like, I don't really want everyone to see this. Beautiful, angelic human being who's full of germs. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think about often. Or, how can I take a picture of this beautiful street mural that's near my apartment, because then people will know where I live, And I think it's something we should all be thinking critically about. But I think that there's a way to feel protective and in love with images and still be able to share them. But I think it's none of that should be done without thought. Or you end up with, like, celebrities writing, like, apologies in the Notes app, and it's like, ew.
Maybe we could take one more.
Yes, I have one down here.
Hello. Thank you for being here. Last year, there was a lot of fashion companies that came out with some clothing that was a little inappropriate, and I know that you've done some Instagram takeovers, one being for Prada, and I just wanted to know, what are your intentions when you do takeovers, and just maybe your thoughts on the whole fashion industry as a whole.
Yeah. Fashion, like art, is complicated. But I really love how, and this is like totally stealing language from my friend Sinead, but I love working in partnership with fashion brands, because no matter what, you can kind of name 5 fashion brands, like, even if you don't care, like, whatever. There's something really powerful, and, like, we just can't go outside naked, and, like, that sucks sometimes, but also, like, it builds this vocabulary and understanding, and perhaps, like, a need to participate in this creative field that is a little bit different than others. But that aside, when I'm thinking about doing takeovers, or when I'm thinking about partnering with brands, it's the relationships that I have with individuals within any of those organizations. It's the relationship I have with the missions of any of those organizations. And it's also my relationship with what I hope the organization will be doing. And so in relationship to Prada especially, it's a really complicated time, right? Like, I was pissed. I was pissed with the way that they handled it. I was pissed with the way that people were impacted by some of the decisions that were being made there. But I also tried to utilize that rage to better partner with them, because they'd supported me already, because they'd supported artists like the Astor Gates already. What does it mean to call in instead of call out is a lot of the work that I've been trying to do recently. But that's just my personal opinion, and that might not be the right one. But I think when you find something that you like, or you find an organization or space that feels like home, you are faced with a difficult decision of whether you're going to boycott or opt in. And I'm way more on the opt in sometimes. And so that's where I'm at right now. Thank you all so much for coming.